Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Church Ops 500. We are going to continue in our church systems conversation. We have none other than the Pastor Mike Cantrell back with us. Definitely encourage you all to go back and look at our first systems drop, which was worship systems. There's a part 1, part 2 from the last couple of months. I think it'll inform the conversation as we move on. Pastor Mike gave us a great kind of overview of all of those systems, and we are going to be looking at one that I think is super important for the sake of our church, its growth, and really pushing beyond that barrier of 500 people. Of course, if you haven't had a chance to listen to our podcast, we really focus on the heart of being able to care for churches, church planners, anyone who's in that world of we got a lot of things to do and not a whole lot of resources to get it done. So if you're listening for the first time, welcome. If you're someone who's been with us for a bit, thanks for coming back. I invite you all to continue to like and rate the content wherever you consume it. It would be huge for us. Continue to share, invite others to our podcast. Also, you can drop a question on our Facebook page anytime you have them. I'll also link Pastor Mike's email, which he has given us and said he's more than willing to follow up with any questions or concerns. So without further ado, we're going to jump right in. I'm going to give Pastor Mike the floor so we can all be encouraged and learn some more things about church systems.
Yeah. And if you're excited about that topic, then you're in the right place.
Come on.
Not a lot of people like talking about it. I love the idea, the concept of systems van, just because, there's a lot of ways we look at our church, and sometimes it can be complex and, so challenging. And oftentimes we look at ministries of how to, improve ministries. What I love about looking at it in systems, sort of like I mentioned this before, but just like your body is made up of systems, your body is pretty complex. And if you start trying to think about how to make your body healthy, the best way to do it is sort of break it down into its parts or into its systems. And it allows you to then diagnose, areas of improvement and things you can strengthen. And just like your body, you have your different systems. For example, your muscular system. Everybody has these systems. They're running in the background, and they're designed to give you exactly what you're getting. But the only way to strengthen and grow is to focus on that system. I mean, if I want to improve what's running in the background as my muscular system, then I've got to lift some weights. I've got to start getting exercise. I've got to feed it the right diet. And it's the same way when you look at your church. All of us want a healthy, thriving, growing church. And to me, this idea, again, I have to give Nelson Searcy a shout out, just because many moons ago, he trained me basically on being able to look at the church's systems. And then I have taken that foundational knowledge and just through experience and the different roles I've played, been able to maximize those, in a way, hopefully that's palatable. So all of you guys out there today, I'm excited because we're going to start talking about the assimilation system. Man, we could talk probably a lot of back-to-back podcasts on this one. It's really important. I do think, however, the assimilation system gives us sort of the fastest ROI, just the return on investment. If we will invest in this system, I believe as a church, we have really one of the quickest opportunities to make improvements. One thing I always say, Van, is that most things in the church can be fixed in 7 days, but sometimes problems linger. And so again, having some sort of strategic system that sits over the top of your church where you can evaluate these things and make improvements, big or small, are going to be, so important for your church. So anyway, let's dive in and talk about that. So whether you've been pastoring a long time, or whether you're a part of a church plan, or really no matter what size you are, I believe there's things that you can do with the assimilation system, to make sure you're maximizing and really working on all cylinders. let's start just a little bit about, the basics of what is an assimilation system. It sounds strange, and you're not going to find that word in the Bible. And so if you over spiritualize it, you'll think, how's this going to help my church? But it actually feeds into everything. And I'll be talking about that all the way back to, the Great Commission of what God's called us to do as a church, to make disciples. The assimilation system is really a huge part of that. So simply put, the assimilation system is an intentional process, intentional being a key word, a church uses to help new guests move from being first-time visitors to fully engaged members of the church. Just a side note, soapbox, I don't love calling people who attend your church for the first time visitors, because I believe that's just the wrong idea. I think you visit the Grand Canyon one time and you never come back. I like the idea that we're a family expecting guests, and every person that ends up at our church address, attending a church function, attending a church service, they're our guests. And I think if we approach it like that, I think it's a subtle shift in our mind, that these aren't outsiders coming to visit, that these are guests that are potential family members. And so how you approach that, is important. So first-time visitors, so to speak, to becoming fully engaged members of the church. I think you and I would agree that really there's a lot of ways to make disciples and all that kind of stuff, but the best way is to have a healthy church that's focused on making disciples. And so if we can welcome guests into that, and we can keep them connected long enough, then they have the best opportunity to meet Jesus and to grow into their purpose, the calling, and fulfilling what God called them to do. And even in that, become part of the mission. So this is going to feed into all of that. So first-time guests becoming fully engaged members, knowing that fully engaged members are going to have the best opportunity to fully follow Jesus and fulfill their destiny. So a lot of times we think of assimilation system as like a list of tasks, but really it's more than that. It's a journey on, designed to build relationships. There's a relational component to it. It fosters belonging. Obviously, that meets a big felt need. I mean, man, we struggle in our culture, in our world right now, with what I call crowded loneliness. There's people are lonely, and if we can invite them into a family and connect them into authentic community, then that's a big felt need that people are looking for, even if they don't know that they're exactly looking for that. And then obviously connecting people to Jesus and ultimately, as I said before, his mission. All of those parts are taking first-time guests into becoming fully engaged members of your church. So at its core, Van, what is assimilation? It's a hospitality component. Hospitality. We all love Chick-fil-A, the Christian chicken. And one of the reasons is because the chicken is world-class, but their hospitality is world-class in most cases. And so we fall in love with chicken because we had a good experience, in the restaurant or in the drive-through line. I don't think anybody does drive-throughs as well as Chick-fil-A. And
come on.
We have a lot to learn from organizations like that. And I'm sure there's others. It's just the first that comes to mind. So there's a hospitality component and there's a discipleship component. So when we're talking about assimilation, we're simply talking about hospitality and discipleship. It's welcoming people into the church family and then helping them discover Jesus and how to follow him. And so like I said, it all plays in that. And you might ask, Van, why is assimilation so important? I think it comes down to the biblical mandate. I don't think you can start talking about assimilation independent of the Great Commission. And so Jesus calls us in the Great mission to go and make disciples, which I believe, obviously individuals are making disciples and all that, but as a church, and we're talking mostly, in church context, and I've said this before, being an old football coach, we used to talk about how we only had 10 opportunities in a season, 10 regular season games. Everything came down to 10 opportunities, 10 Friday nights. And the correlation is the church has 52 weeks. For the most part, most of us are doing one service a week. Some may be doing two or whatever, but we have 52 weeks to make a difference.
Come on.
And it begins with creating a culture where people feel welcomed, as I've mentioned, and valued. One thing I've really been looking at lately, Van, is just the idea of how can we make our guests the hero in our environment. And that might strike you weird because we all think, well, Jesus is the hero. Yeah, Jesus ultimately is the hero and is the answer. But I think sometimes the mistake we make is we focus too much on our church being the hero and focusing on our next great thing, our next great series, this great program. And we are selling, so to speak, our church. But really, some of our focus, or most of our focus, ought to be on what can we do in the lives of others, making them the hero in a sense of like, when you come into X church, you're not just going to engage a great program and this program is better than the program down the road, but you're going to find your destiny. You're going to discover your calling.
Come on.
Every person is on this journey. It's sort of a uphill swim against culture and all the cravings of the world and all the difficulties and challenges that we face, suffering and injustices and grief, and most ultimately sin as our enemy. And the church then becomes a guide, so to speak, to help the hero find a solution to their problem and walk in the fullness of their purpose and destiny. And so some of that, again, is, like I said, we're creating a culture that's others focused. How can we focus not on ourselves and selling ourselves, but focus on our community and help people realize who they're called to be as Jesus transforms them, and then how they're called to be on this mission to take the kingdom to the world. And so it's like I said, it's this parallel sort of two tracks of hospitality and discipleship. And it all begins with creating a culture where people feel welcome and valued. That was all of my soapbox moment about people feeling valued.
Come on.
Jesus obviously, Van, modeled that for us. He invited us into relationship. And often as we read scripture, if you look at Jesus's life, everything just started with an invitation, And so in that way, our assimilation process, it really aligns with the Great Commission to go and make disciples. And as you know, that starts with evangelism, engaging our culture and community. And then the second phase of that goes to that discipleship aspect of really establishing them in the word and the faith and the church. And so to me, I look at assimilation partnering with the evangelism, not only as the corporate church, but also as for every individual. I think it's the responsibility, Van, of our leaders, and I hope we can grasp this today, leaders of church, to really partner in evangelism to build what I call a trusted culture. The bottom line is, if people have a life-changing experience in a safe and trusted environment, you're going to invite people into that. You know what I mean? Thinking, I'm out here in West Texas, the land of a lot of taco shops. and there's life-changing tacos that you can have. But I'm not always going to invite everybody into that to have that life-changing taco, no matter how life-changing it is. If the environment is a bit skeptical or scary, that partnership, I have something that will change your life, and it's also going to be something that I don't have to kind of worry about my relationship and put my relationship on the line with the neighborhood I'm taking you into. And so,
come on.
if you're following me in that, I think it's our goal, the heartbeat of our church, then to create trusted environments. And when you start talking about assimilation, that's a huge piece of the puzzle. And so I like to talk about evangelism. Obviously gets into the point where we are presenting the gospel to somebody, helping them cross the line, stop trusting in themselves, start trusting in God for salvation. But I call it, there's an entry level evangelism where I call it invest and invite. I'm not sure where I got that term, but I've made it my own over the years. And that is, I'm going to invest in relationships. I'm going to build relationships, and I'm going to look for bridges to then invite them into a relationship with Jesus. And one of the best ways, where if I know I have a place that their sole focus is to invite people, to be welcoming, hospitable, and invite people into a relationship with Jesus, then man, that place is doing the hard work for me in a lot of ways. And so what better place that to be than our local church, where we know I can trust, after I've built with my neighbor a strong relationship, that I'm also got to go home and, look across the fence and he's mowing his yard tomorrow, or, that walking our children tomorrow, that they're not going to say, man, I thought you were a good neighbor, but you invited me to this crazy place. And so assimilation is really all about building that environment. And again, just to reiterate, it's walking in this biblical mandate where the two tracks of hospitality and discipleship. And so, any questions about that? Maybe we'll just pause right there before we go to the second aspect.
Definitely.
Of that.
So many great points. And I think when we think about that word assimilation, it's definitely started to have this almost shady context to it, right? And if we aren't taking the time to really explain the heart of it, being authentic, many times we see the assimilation process becomes an end unto itself, right? And that's where it becomes really toxic, really dangerous for the church. Well, I've been told that I have to wave and shake the hand of every person. I don't really like shaking hands or waving at people, but I'm going to do that every Sunday because my pastor told me to do it. And it begins to feel inauthentic and feels like, oh, they're playing a role, rather than it being, I'm truly interested in building relationship with you and learning more about you. And I think one of the things you said is so important for us to be looking for, is as I'm building relationship, there will be a bridge, an opportunity to invite. If I'm leading with the opportunity to invite, then I am clearly communicating that my relationship is built on whether or not you accept this invite, versus the relationship now informs that invitation. And I'm inviting you because I've gotten to know you. I'm inviting you because I feel like this would be a good next step for you. So not rushing that process. And one of the things I think you said as well in light of that is really thinking about the long-term impact of your assimilation process, and taking from the world. I'd love to expound on this a little bit because you mentioned it briefly with Chick-fil-A. I think there's also this space where, as a church, well, we can learn nothing from the world. There's nothing the world can teach us about, right? Only the church does this well. But we look at Chick-fil-A, I immediately think of companies like Disney World, where, man, hospitality, they've got the market cornered. Are we willing to go, hey, one of our pastors here says this all the time, am I willing to eat the meat and spit out the bones? Like what is there that I can take, that I can use in light of our environment, that can be used for the sake of good, can be used for the sake of growing the Christian environment. So when you think about that idea of hospitality, where are some of those practical sources? Where are some of those places that you go, here's a great space to see, to learn, to gain new insight on what that could look like for your ministry?
Yeah, you put me on the spot a little bit with that question, but I mean, well, obviously we've mentioned two great ones here, and it doesn't mean that you have to agree with the ideology of the place. I mean, it's more, everything about doing church at this level. I believe with the people we're talking about today, there's a science and an art to it. And obviously, as you said, you can't forget the relational aspect of it. Sometimes you can get so locked into the business side and all that, the science of it, that we forget the relationship of it. But all of it's to help point people to Jesus. And that's why I started with the Great Commission, the biblical mandate as the foundation of the assimilation process. But man, we can learn from almost every experience. So like if I'm leading a church, in almost every environment I go into, I sort of have an evaluative eye. I always think, man, leaders are learners. I need to be learning. And so I'll check into a Marriott. I'm learning. And the places I like to stay are inviting, from and we'll talk about this a little bit, right from what it's like pulling up to the place. It's crazy. But I'm starting to learn. Like if I pull up into a shady hotel, my wife's not getting out of the car. Immediately our brain subconsciously kicks into like, am I safe place? Is this a place I want to come back to? Is this a place where I feel welcomed and I know that my family is going to be loved? Everything speaks to that. You walk into a hotel lobby, there's nice music playing. I love when there's actually a cold water. It's as simple as putting ice water, out for me. Like, okay, I've been traveling. I've got to talk here and check in. It's great to kind of get a little water. It's even better when there's lemon in it or something, right?
Come on.
What does it sound like? What does it smell like? All of these places are doing things to create a compelling environment that you're welcome into. We can learn a lot about the hospitality, side of things from almost anywhere you go. Often you'll learn what to do, and probably more often you'll learn what not to do.
What not to do.
And so, so I think that, as we continue on here, not only is it going to impact the individual who connects to Jesus and their lives are changed and, their family, a dad gets right with God, all of a sudden the whole environment in his home changes. The wife, the kids, they come to Christ, kids go to camp. God has radically changed that because of a simple process on the beginning. Like they came to church and they felt welcomed enough to stay to hear the message that actually had eternal impact and changed their lives.
Come on.
So not only is there the individual aspect, but also, obviously the purpose of this podcast is just talking about the health and growth of your church. Obviously, that exactly what I was saying. Most people who come to your church are starting to make those decisions to return within the first few minutes to campus.
So good.
That they arrive in the parking lot, wherever you are. I know people are challenged sometimes with, church plants, have to meet in some crazy places, schools, storefronts, things. I get that. Like not everybody can have a Taj Mahal to enter, but I believe every person can make strides towards this to alleviate some of those hurdles in people's minds and to get them past those first few minutes so that they can get into worship, so that they can encounter God, so that they can hear, the sermon and be impacted by the truth of the gospel. So people the big thing here is you don't really realize what's affecting your church growth. It's not just people coming to Christ because of the message, but it's actually the clues that you're using to make them feel welcome as they enter into your, to your church, to your campus. So all of that is important. And then all of that speaks to, the health and growth of your church. It's the assimilation process, that basically you're looking for, is it clear? Is it intentional? Is it relational? The more that those things are in place, the more likely it is for those first-time guests to become fully engaged members. And it helps them also, as we'll get into, if they, did decide to come, and if they did decide to make it long enough to get through a service, it's assimilation goes all the way through those follow-up steps that we'll talk about, so that, it helps them from falling through the cracks, feeling unseen, and becoming disconnected. All of that plays an important role, into the assimilation process. So I was just going to jump into a little bit of some things that are included. I'm going to go really quickly here. Feel free to stop me.
Let's do it.
We can talk more about this later too. I mean, I love, as you can tell, I'm passionate about it. I'm passionate about the system, but this one, I just think if we will lock into this and invest in this, I feel like before Sunday morning, well, depending on when you hear this, there's actually some shifts and adjustments you can make to make that next experience better.
Yep.
Of course, we like to be practical on this podcast. I know you do. And if it's not helping people, I don't want to say it. So my goal here is to help people. So here's some parts that you may or may not think about when you're talking about the assimilation system. Here's, some of the core pieces of it. One is thinking about what happens before the visit, like the pre-visit preparation. Most people are coming to church, and before they come to church, even on an invite, they're probably going to go to your website. So most people don't maybe not even think of that as part of the assimilation process. But, is there, do you have a user-friendly website? Does it sort of address their questions? A lot of times, again, we make ourselves the hero and we try to present ourselves in our website as being better than the church down the road, having better programs and better things, but we're not even really addressing the messaging or the questions in the heart of the people are looking for. Like, am I going to feel accepted here? Am I going to find people that are like me here? Is this church, are they even aware of how I feel, and what I need or what I think I need as I come into the church? So all that, we don't have time to dive into that. I know you probably want to, but that's probably a whole other podcast. And then, thinking about pre-visit preparation, is there signage clear? Can people actually find my church? Is there actually, when people Google, and you'll be shocked, like I visit churches and, they're like, I'm going to go to this church and I have to ask the pastor for an address because even on the Google map, it's not on there. And so like, can people find your church? And then once they get there, is the signage clear? Is there helpful communication? So, and all of that, so that people know what to expect when they attend. Obviously, you don't like coming into a place that's unfamiliar and it's being obvious to everyone that you're new there. You want to sort of blend in. And we can do a lot of things to give people clues so that that they're not just asking from the jump, like, where is the auditorium? Where do you, where are all of those kind of things? And that kind of ties into the second piece, first impression team. As you know, there's that cliche saying that there's only one chance to make a first impression. And I'll be, surprised that churches that do really well, do worship that's just incredible, sermons that are well thought out and prepared and just Christ-centered and life-changing. But we don't really think about what it takes, as I've mentioned, to get people into that point.
Come on.
So I visited a church recently, barely found it. When I barely found it, I didn't find anybody. I saw some cars. I parked the car, and it was probably 3 or 4 minutes before I even met somebody. Wow. And so we have to think about, our parking lot attendants, that are there for multiple purposes. One, they're the first face people meet. Can we help people get a parking place? Even if it's obvious, just having someone there to think, oh, someone's here to help me find a parking place. And I'm not saying be legalistic and park them in some sort of order, we as Americans like that, like, don't tell me where to park, but be there to greet me. That's my first clue that, hey, these guys are expecting me to come today. They're looking out for me. They're helping me find a parking place. I mean, it's that simple, and then greeters, and then whatever welcome desk, welcome mechanism you may have. One thing we have in our church here, we have what we call New Here cubes. So we have these little cubes that are kind of mobile, and we have people that are like, we're here to help. We're glad you're here, kind of people that are accessible, that are obvious and accessible, that just, that are warm and inviting and help people find that. So that's then the whole first impression team's a part of it. The follow-up process is a part of it, Van. Like, thank you for coming. Having, an immediate response, whether it be an email or handwritten note, or even a text message. Maybe you're using something like that to say, within 24 to 48 hours, they're saying, hey, we saw you. We're glad you're here. Let us know how we could welcome you back, and we'd love to see you next week. One of the big tasks for growing churches is taking first-time guests and making them actually second-time guests. Again, that's why I don't like to use the word visitor. I don't want them to come visit once and maybe never come back. They're guests. You're welcome this week and you're welcome next week. And that, there's a whole follow-up process and science to that. Having next steps for people to take for engagement is the fourth one. Just a next steps pathway of clear, actionable next steps, such as, we might say like joining a small group or attending a membership class or serving on a team. Just how can I get involved? Whether it's their first time or second time, eventually this messaging is these people not only want me to come and be a spectator, they want me to get involved, and they're making it easy, and they're taking barriers away from that. Just speaking of that, one of the things I say, the only barrier I want people to encounter when they come to our church is the gospel. The only thing I won't remove is the gospel. They're going to have to respond to the gospel, as we know it's often offensive. But everything else I want to remove. I want to make it as clear and easy, accessible to connect and lock into our church, because the goal is, I kind of compare it to fishing, Van. It's like, when you catch a fish, first of all, it's pretty hard to get them on the hook. But once they're on the hook, the fisherman can actually do two things to make it unsuccessful and not get the fish in the boat. One, they can overreel and have the tension too tight, and actually they themselves break the line. Or second is they can not reel at all and let the fish take out too much line and just be passive, and then the fish goes under a rock and breaks the line. So this sort of assimilation is sort of that tension of, okay, the fish is on the hook. Now the goal is to get them in the boat. Again, not just in the boat so that we can grow our church, but because our church is here to fulfill the Great Commission. And so everything here is talking about the proper tension that we need to get them from being the first-time visitor, first-time guest to our church, to a fully engaged member, because we know that if they become fully engaged, God's going to change their lives. So hopefully that, I'm making sense in that. So so pre-visit preparation, first-time impressions, follow-up process, next step pathways, connection opportunities to meet people and grow in relationship is keys. Things like newcomer lunches or dinners, maybe open houses or meet and greets for pastors and staff, or even coffee meetups to follow so that they build relationships with others in the church is part of assimilation.
Thank you all so much for joining us today with Pastor Mike as we talk through the church system of assimilation. As I said, we are going to continue to crank these systems out over the next couple of months. We invite you to continue to like, to share, to rate. If you've got any questions, as always, please reach out so we can get that information to Pastor Mike or myself and we can answer. Also, everywhere you consume this information, please continue to like and share so that others can get this valuable access. It helps us also become a little more visible so we can continue to support churches that are trying to break that church barrier of 500 folks, hence the name of our podcast, Church Ops 500. So remember, every day with the right tools, the right systems, the right relationships, it is possible for you to do the impossible with less. Thank you guys for hanging out with us, and we will definitely see you in the next session where we will jump into part 2 of the church assimilation system. We got to cover a lot of great things today and looking forward to continuing this conversation.